But have you met with him?
Dunbrook scratched at the rock floor, leaving gouges under his front foot. The baby kicked and turned, not appreciating the dragon's tone. "If you mean, have I discussed anything more than the weather and his health? No, I have not. As I understand, he is busy with a new project."
"That is what we are concerned about,"
Dunbrook said. "The translations he is working on. I do not understand why they might bring you concern." "His new assistant, the one you sent." Oh, that was a dangerous tone of voice from Chudley. The son her father never had indeed. Miss Elizabeth Bennet bore this description of herself with pride. Being her late father's favourite daughter, she had shouldered all his estate-related responsibilities, for all intents and purposes. Elizabeth offered another nod. "Can we untie each other's hands?" she whispered back. "Mine are tied in front and to a rope around my waist." "Mine are tied to a rope around my neck. If I move my hands too much, the rope tightens." A brief struggle made it plain neither could reach the other's wrists. With a sigh, he settled more firmly against the floor of their prison. Elizabeth pressed her lips together and did likewise. At first she couldn't shake her embarrassment at being pressed so close to Mr. Darcy, but there was no room to move away. As the journey wore on, she grew thankful for the comfort and warmth of his presence. Each time they halted, her whole body tensed, a reaction she could feel mirrored in Mr. Darcy's frame. "Captain, how are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to die," his mind screamed. He peered closely at the man. About Darcy's own age, the young man had a broad, flushed face and light-coloured hair. It was a face that usually would be happy, he considered. That it wasn't was a cause for concern. "Hurt," was all Darcy could manage. "I should think you do," the unknown man said in a soft Georgia accent, with a hint of a smile. The break in the man's serious mien was comforting. Darcy waved a hand before his face. I... "Rest easy," the man said. "Your eyes are undamaged. You have a serious injury to your forehead, and the bandage must cover one eye." "Dear Mary, I am all astonishment. My bold and beautiful cousin in love with a clergyman. Though I have no objection to that noble profession, it was to be Mr. Wickham's career had he not been so cruelly wronged. But I know you have decided opinions on that particular species. I have rather soured on officers lately, and much to my surprise that is not a singular opinion at LongBourn. Prepare yourself for something very shocking, Mary. Lydia has actually declined Mrs. Forster's invitation to accompany the regiment to Brighton. She and Kitty have been nearly as distressed as I have by Mr. Wickham's unexpected betrothal, and, to my annoyance, twice as vocal about their disappointment. I suppose I can more easily forgive his sudden nuptials. "Hello," a sweet female voice said, ragged at the edges and touched with worry. "Is someone here?" The day flooded back to him. He sat up. "Oh!" the woman gasped, eyes wide. Hello?" Definitely brown, he thought, though one of her eyes was partially swollen closed. A warm honey-brown by candlelight, and, though wary, holding a commendable lack of panic. With no idea what to say, he mimicked her. "Hello." "Where am I? What happened?" She made to raise her broken left arm and winced, looking down to take in the splint. With her other hand she gingerly touched her head. She then glanced about the little room before focusing on him once more. "And I apologize for my rudeness, but who are you?" How odd that they would not choose a lavish chamber fitting their rank for their meetings.
You are aware of the Dragon Sage's departure?
Dunbrook huffed fetid breath Wentworth's way. The largest and sternest-looking drake anyone had ever seen. His deep, stony grey face appeared chiselled into a permanent scowl with a voice to match. It has recently been explained to me. I had no foreknowledge nor any participation in it. Sometimes a little offence was the best defence. The look Chudley shot at Dunbrook suggested Wentworth was right. The Amphithea rose high on her serpentine tail. Her body was long and slender, covered in striking jade-green scales. The child squirmed and yelled when Watkins boxed his ears. The racket was distracting. Time slowed as Watkins watched Bennet come even with him. Responding to an apparent kick in the shins, Watkins released the boy, grabbed his leg, and started hopping about. The carriage was less than 75 feet away and coming at full gallop. Watkins dropped all pretense of injury and dove. Bennet's weight was no match for 16 stone of solid muscle and 30 years of pent-up rage. Knocked off his feet, Bennet flew toward the gutter, landing on Grosvenor Street's cobbles between the team's front hoofs and rear. A split second sooner, and his head would have been crushed. Awkwardly splayed, Bennet's right leg lay on the road. His left leg and body were in the ditch. Watkins, already ignoring his victim, did register the crunch of wheels breaking Bennet's body. Mary could tell that her friend deliberately ignored the medieval Earl, while glancing his way on occasion. "I think our ancestor is quite smitten with your friend," the current Earl whispered. Turning his way, Mary whispered, "Do all the St. Edmund men sneak up on people?" She realized how rude she sounded, and hastily added, "My lord." The Earl chuckled. "We cannot speak of our gift openly amongst company, so we sneak." Mary took a deep breath, pasted a smile on her face, and hissed her next question through her teeth. "Which ancestor did you mean, my lord? Earl Thomas or Earl Sebastian?" "Either, I suppose, though Thomas is more used to elegant dalliance than is Sebastian." "Earl Sebastian is extremely fierce-looking." No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her born to be an heroine. Her situation in life, the character of her father and mother, her own person and disposition, were all equally against her. Her father was a clergyman, without being neglected or poor, and a very respectable man, though his name was Richard, and he had never been handsome. He had a considerable independence besides 2 good livings, and he was not in the least addicted to locking up his daughters. His mother was a woman of useful plain sense, with a good temper, and, what is more remarkable, with a good constitution. She had 3 sons before Catherine was born, and instead of dying in bringing the latter into the world, as anybody might expect. "What does he mean by standing there like an avenging angel?" she asked in a whisper, almost hissing the words. Charlotte looked at her friend, startled by the vehemence in her voice. "Why, I am sure I do not know. But he was listening closely to your conversation with Colonel Forster. Perhaps he wishes to solicit a dance?" "You jest, Charlotte," Elizabeth said more calmly. "Besides, there is no music." "Ah, but the lack of music is easily rectified, since my father has a fine instrument, and I would much prefer for you to exhibit, rather than your sister." Henry tried to caution his brother with a touch. The younger Fitzwilliam dodged out of reach. "Easy, George," Henry whispered. If anything happens to Aunt Mary's wardrobe, we will never see Christmas. Papa will send us off to be cabin boys in Uncle Will's West Africa squadron." George gamely replied, nervous at violating his mother's orders, but refusing to admit anything could go awry. "I only want to peek inside to see what Aunt Mary has hidden. Probably nothing more than bonnets, gloves, and slippers. But I will take care, since I look forward to seeing your face when Black Pete leaves you a pile of coal." The boy's chin firmed, and he grabbed the gloves and tossed them aside before he leaned toward the cabinet. George planted both hands on the door handles and made to pull. 1,000 bees buzzed, and the pressure built. "Yes, quite. Ah, here is Huxley." I went to the sideboard as my butler presented my best aged Campbelltown. "Thank you, Huxley. Yes, a fresh glass, if you please." I glanced over my shoulder at George and Bingley, both trying not to look like they were watching me. I sighed. "And 2 more fresh glasses." Rather shortly we were all suited with full glasses of my best Scotch, and I pretended not to notice the smug look on my brother's face. Once again he had charmed me out of a bottle, but I was rather more interested in listening to what Bingley had to say than scowling at George. The chap was clever, rather too modest, and I wondered how George had stumbled into his acquaintance, but I found him no punishment to speak with for a quarter hour. Perhaps George had accidentally found a friend who could speak of something more serious than hunting-hounds and racehorses. I glanced around the empty lawn. Out for some exercise?" His nostrils flared. "Do I look like a man out enjoying some sport this morning?" I pursed my lips. "You look like a man running for your life. I only ask because, well, who exactly were you running from?" His eyes darted wildly over my shoulder, and without warning he let out a high-pitched yelp, pointing just past me. "Him!" he cried, his voice cracking. "Right there!" I whipped around, my heart surging against my ribs in sudden terror. There was no one, just an empty lawn, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I turned back to him, eyebrows raised. "Mr. Darcy, there is no one there." His eyes went wide, as though I had just suggested the moon was made of cheese. "What do you mean, no one? He's standing right there." "The steward is excellent and will guide him." Darcy quickly offered his assistance. "The solicitor for Meryton is my brother-in-law, Phillips. He aided me in the purchase when it was sold for a fraction of its value. Save Madeline, you 3 are the only ones who know. I intend to sell it for a profit to support my sisters when their husbands have gone on to their reward. I employ a few local servants to maintain its upkeep. Of course, my nephew offered, hoping to avoid the season without young Bingley to help the conversation along. But that doesn't mean they'll notice your nieces." "Did I say anything of my nieces?" "Aren't you concerned that young Bingley's manners may mark him capricious, and my nephew reticent, in so small a society?" Lady Matlock tutted. "Your nephew is reticent. Quite escaped my notice." Gardiner snuffled. No doubt Darcy thought one grasping Miss Bingley was easier to avoid than 2 matchmaking aunts. "It did not occur to me that you would take notice of George's age, let alone be angry with me. Most people aren't as caring." With a snort of amusement, Mr. Darcy admitted, "While I do care, I do not know if I would be quite as caring if my wife hadn't got wind of George's age." Albert chuckled. "They do make us better people, do they not?" "Indeed." Mr. Darcy turned to the door, then swung back. The name George, is it a family name? Albert couldn't suppress a grin. We thought you would be more amenable to a child who bears your name. Mr. Darcy glanced at the parlour door, where the woman and George had long since disappeared. I am, if you do not mind. I will become his godfather. Mrs. Bennet's shoulders slumped. Her gaze slid away from her daughters. "I have been attempting to explain, Mamma," Lizzie said, keeping her voice calm. "There is no need for me to make my father a highly improper activity for you to ask me to engage in, as though I could make my father do anything. You could if you chose to," her mother muttered. "I do not choose to," Lizzie said with more sharpness than she had intended. She took a deep breath, released it slowly, and continued. "My father waited upon the Bingley household yesterday morning, and without any interference from me." Mrs. Bennet started, and sudden smiles wreathed her countenance. She reached out impulsively, as though to hug her daughter, but she caught herself before she touched Lizzie. "I had no hand in my father's decision to do his neighbourly duty.